going on and on. Let's just go right into the reviews. We're going to start with a pretty. This is the second time I'm going to use this in the pre-meeting before the show. I mentioned this iconic group, Run DMC. Matt, why don't you go ahead and run the numbers, and then I think Josh has Seg 1.
Okay, so Run DMC's self-titled debut album comes in at number 492 in the 1980s on Best Ever Albums, number 53 in 1984, and number 3,153 of all time. It is Run DMC's second highest rated album on Best Ever Albums. It is the only group that we are covering tonight that is on Rolling Stone's list. That comes in at number 378. And Run DMC is ranked number 816 of overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums. Again, I will say that seems probably a little low for.
Well, remember, hip hop wasn't really a album genre at that time, Matt. So maybe that skews it.
No,
I
know,
bit.
But just like being such, forerunners in a massively popular genre, I think that they would deserve higher than 816 of all time. That's all. Rod Stewart's probably rated higher than. By the way, I was looking through the 500 artists.
We're getting a tangent here.
Sorry, I just saw of all the great albums we've covered, particularly like in the late 70s and early 80s, and Rod Stewart's still sitting there in the top 200 of all time. Get out of here! That is nonsense. Shut up, Rolling Stone.
Is he the highest one that shouldn't be that high?
I don't. Yes. Well, either him or James Taylor. They're like 1 and 1A.
Astro Weeks. Can I throw that in as well? Yeah.
God. Anyway, sorry. Josh, I think you got the first take on this.
Yeah. So Run DMC.
No, Matt, you had the first take. But Josh has the
Yes,
first
you
one.
had the hot take.
Sorry, I had a hot take there. Sorry, I couldn't contain myself. That was Anyway.
I think this is the first time I've listened to this album before. I mean, I've definitely heard songs off of this album. This is going to be similar in sound to, the Grandmaster Flash album that we listened to with the Furious Five. It is early seminal rap. Run DMC is iconic for a lot of reasons. Obviously, they're kind of one of the first groups to just have high, what am I trying to say? They were just very popular. And they also had a lot of crossover appeal, mainly with their work with rock artists like Aerosmith later on in Raising Hell, and even on this album they have the second track, Rock Box, which has guitar on it and is kind of like a rock-based song with them rapping over it, or rock instrumental. And so I think that's part of the appeal too. They're both really good rappers, and then Jam Master Jay on the turntables is the other key member of the group. And he shouldn't be forgotten, because this is still around the time where DJing and scratching is important to the rap song and the rap album, and I think that's part of the appeal for me listening to this. Also is hearing that some of the later tracks on the album are basically just instrumental or DJ tracks. There's not a lot of rapping on them. Like the last track, Jay's Game, is basically an instrumental or something that you could rap over. And then the other really great thing about Run DMC is their back and forth, and the way that they complete the sentences and complete the rhymes, not just back and forth with after sentences back and forth, but like within sentences they'll kind of go back and forth and complete it, and that's really fun. Their beats are classic. People would probably listen to this album now and think that the rapping sounds kind of basic and in that like traditional, easy to understand style, but it's the foundation that all other rap is based on. And
see if you got a diss track on it, Josh.
Oh yes, Sucker MCs,
Mm-hmm.
and which is great. Actually, my favorite song. Oh, the other thing too is the drum machine. The use of the drum machine on this. Hard Times. Not talking about Dusty Roads, but the title track on it is kind of the I mean, that's kind of, that first track really says it all and makes the defining statement about what Run DMC is about and what you're going to get listening to their album. I don't think I heard Rockbox before, but I really liked it. I thought the guitar part was awesome. I thought they sounded perfect on top of it, and I really enjoyed that. I think I like that better than when they do the song with Aerosmith, which I feel like is kind of overplayed at this point, but is important historically. And I guess the other important thing is kind of their look as well. We don't really talk about that in listening to the album, but with the Adidas, and they kind of created some of the look, or at least popularized the look of what was going on in hip hop culture at that time, and with the tracksuits and things like that. But yeah, I enjoyed this album. I wasn't like super blown away with it. It's more of like a respecting of the album more than like full on love with it and listen to it all the time. There's definitely songs I would listen to again, but it's important to listen to, and so I liked it from that perspective.
Matt,
is it me? Okay,
It is.
yeah. So yeah, I didn't really know much of this record at all, really. Maybe little things here and there. And it's definitely, I think we talked about this maybe when we did Grandmaster Flash, but it's very similar to an experience of listening to this as a rap album, and it's in a similar vein as is to like listen to like Chuck Berry and rock and roll. It's a very stripped down, rudimentary, classic version of a genre that would later explode, right, and come to dominate the airwaves and video and everything really. So in that sense, it's a very simple record when you compare it to what came afterwards. But in the context of when it came out, it's clearly different and unique and groundbreaking. Even when we did Grandmaster Flash, there was rapping on that, but there was also, it was like a half rap album and a half R&B / soul record. There was stuff on there that's clearly not rap. So this is our first full blown rap album, and there's various things that I do like about it. I think you're right, Josh, that I really like the back and forth, the vocals, like you're trading off the rapping parts that they're doing. I think the Beastie Boys would do that later on, and then even like stuff like Jurassic 5, that was a big thing that they did as well. And I like that. It's pretty cool how they kind of, trade off back and forth like that. So I like that too. I really liked, to me, my favorite song on here is Rockbox. That's, to me, it's the fullest sound. It's got a great guitar lick in the background. And even the thing that actually makes the song for me isn't so much the guitar, although that's really great. There's that little bell kind of sound in the background that's adding this. It's like a ting ting sound. It's not like
they're
a
tapping
bell.
a bottle or something almost.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. It's probably some sort of effect that they're that Jam Master Jay is doing, but I just think that, and I've noticed that with rap in general, that little elements like that's not part of the beat, it's not part of the bass or track like that, but it's this other kind of part and sometimes it's melodic and sometimes it's not. Like this is just like a constant ringing that, I don't know, it just adds like a layer to the song overall that I think really makes it a fuller sound and more interesting. So I really like that. That was a great song, and I thought that there was another song on here. Maybe it was 30 Days that had a little bit more going on, because there are some songs in here that have more instrumentation. It's not just all a drum machine or occasional scratching or something like that. Although those are probably the main instrumentation that's happening here. So, there's some similarities here. Like I thought that Hard Times and It's Like That, which are actually both opening tracks to side A, side B, are very similar to me. Like the beat is very similar. And actually the first time I listened to it, I'm like, is this just a remake of Hard Times? Like, is it the same song with different lyrics? And it's not. There are differences there upon further listen, but it suffers a little bit from that. But so yeah, I agree with you, Josh. It certainly didn't blow me away. It's I guess a little bit in the sense of when it came out, that it's like, wow, there's this new thing and we haven't really heard anything, like this before. So in that sense, definitely want to give props to it. And you're absolutely right about the image and the Adidas and that, the big chains, that became a big feature of a lot of rap artists in the early 80s. So definitely give them all kinds of props for that. But at the end of the day, it's a fun record to listen to. It's not, it isn't blowing my mind, but it's still fun. And I pretty much enjoyed it. I think, I don't know, maybe a couple of songs in here a little long, like Wake Up I wasn't feeling that one as much. Maybe there were some of the effects that I just wasn't into it too much, but overall it's a pretty good listen. And, but it definitely reminds me of this is just the beginning, and so for somebody that's really into hip hop over the years that never heard this, that comes back to it, I could see them being very nonplussed by it, because it is rather basic when you compare it to those other artists. But overall, thumbs up. I did enjoy it.
Well, I'll challenge a little bit the idea that it's the very beginning, because like to me, what Run DMC represents is sort of the second wave of rap. Like wave one is always that roller rink, like house party DJ, like very disco sample rap, I'd say, that we got in the Grandmaster Flash album. And you've got, like Curtis Blow or Houdini,
like Sugar Hill Gang, Houdini, all those people, like Melly Mel, who was in, the Furious Five. But and that's where I always thought of it like as very street, but also like kind of disco-y. Yeah. That's where the samples came from, and funk was where it came from. I always view like Run DMC as sort of the Chuck Berry analogy. Matt, was a pretty good one. I can see what you're saying, and it does serve a similar function. But this is where some of the things that even someone listening to it and viewing it almost like as a Jurassic form of rap would start to see things that became elements of, I think, hip hop in this album. First, you've got the finishing the lyrics as opposed to someone taking a verse each time. Like early hip hop is always somebody gets the verse, right? And goes, and even in the 90s, that's prominently the style. It goes back to that. And West Coast kind of always stayed there, like a guy would rap and then the next guy would get his turn and stuff. And, when you think of the 90s, right? And like Bone Thugs and Harmony, or all the collaborations, or the Fugees, it was always they got their own verse. Now they blended in and stuff in the background, but they weren't calling and responding. But this ushered in that era from about here to the late 80s, where tons of people were doing the call and response version of hip hop. The Beasties, I think, are probably the ones that people will immediately recognize. But when you think of LL Cool J, though, he kind of like does it with himself. Like he does call and response of his own raps a little bit, and that's almost a DJ technique, I'd say, more than an MC technique in terms of how I look at it. But it is not my favorite style of rapping. So Run DMC for me has always been not amongst my favorite old school hip hop acts, because that type of flow doesn't speak to me as much. Now, with that being said, it does stand out, like lyrical content wise, fashion, sort of the culture. If we're going to talk about the culture of what we would call hip hop now, which I don't even think exists. It was rap at this point in time as opposed to hip hop. Hip hop, the culture, rap, the music, right? But this is, I think, the first time we're seeing a group that starts to put elements of that in. And then throughout the 80s, other sort of seminal acts take parts of what Run DMC lays down and add other parts that would be common tropes, right? Whether it be like some of what NWA did, would become part of it. LL Cool J, I think, is kind of undersold as someone who kind of created prototypes of like the solo rapper. And there's others too, like Rakim, right? Created, consciousness rap and stuff, and but here's where you're getting the first people that are bringing the culture into hip hop, even if the sound of the tracks doesn't really outlast the 80s, unless you consider what the Beastie Boys were doing in the 90s to be. And really no one raps like that after. I mean, there's select examples, but Josh and Matt, can you think of anybody who, when we get to the 90s and 00s and 10s, that has that call and response rap? No, I can't.
I just thought of Jurassic 5. They kind of do that, don't they?
A little bit, yeah. They I mean, they and the Beastie Boys, I think, are probably the last couple people left in the 90s doing
I mean,
that,
Beastie
but-
Boys came from this time. I mean, Jurassic 5, I wasn't aware of them until the early 2000s. I don't know how.
But even when
they
like
started,
Tribe Called Quest and De La Soul come, right? They're not rapping this way. They're rapping a different
Yeah.
way, where they're taking verses, or people get out and then like the Wu-Tang Clan, right? They're a classic, like hand the mic off, hand the mic on, kind of along the way. But anyway, that's a long way of saying that I think this album for me is more appreciated in a way where it's like the history, and I almost appreciate it as much as a history album as I do as a piece of music. Another thing they did that's there is the crossover, right? Like this was designed, Rockbox was designed to cross over. It's like, hey, if we take a guitar riff, right, we might be able to get like white kids to listen to this and break, which I don't think was a piece of, in the house party days, right? You were playing for your audience, and it was urban, and it was kind of like, we're going to pick the song that sounds best, not necessarily with anything beyond a local approach. This was the first album that kind of went for it in hip hop, from my understanding, that broke big and kind of cross culturally, outside of just an individual track. So I would say I'm in the middle on this. As you guys have mentioned, I think the two best songs on this by quite a bit are Rockbox and 30 Days, in my opinion, are the two clear standouts. You've got two of the old school like DJ tracks, which in the 80s you couldn't make an album, right, without a track devoted to the DJ entirely. And we saw that already with the Grandmaster Flash album as well. And this one, you got Jam Master Jay at 3, and then you've got Jay's Game at 9. I would say Jam Master Jay is the stronger of them. Tracks like Sucker MCs and It's Like That are kind of classic old school hip hop staples. I remember I had the Source hip hop hits the early years, and I think It's Like That was on there with a couple of the other, I'm trying to think what else was represented on. They didn't have Walk This Way. They had My Adidas was on there and stuff like that. So I would probably say I absolutely was very familiar with Rockbox. To me, that's one of the first 2 or 3 songs I think of when I think of Run DMC. So I'm actually surprised you guys weren't as familiar with that one, because it always interests me that it's not like a real sample. I think the story is like they heard a rock band play, and then they were inspired, and then they just kind of tried to do a guitar-based background. So I always think that there should be a sample I should be ferreting out, but there really isn't. It was created unique, I believe. So yeah, thumbs in the middle for me, but certainly a piece of hip-hop history.
Yep.
Is there a movie equivalent to this, Josh? Because I know you're a movie guy. Like, can you think of something that is a movie form of like what Run DMC is stage-wise? Hip hop's kind of like, the dinosaurs, right? There's these periods, like the Jurassic and the Prosaic. It's like different stuff, and I always think of hip hop that way. There's these like eras that are close together but have small nuances. So, can you think of anything? Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It may be like the transition to sound in movies. I don't know. I mean, there's definitely early.
So Run DMC's the talkie of hip hop.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely movies in the early '80s that kind of highlight and capitalize on rap culture, but I don't think that's what you're asking. But
when do you think hip hop, like rap and hip hop, become like solidified as big? Is it here? Is it later in the 80s? Is it with the rise of the West Coast, East Coast stuff? Is it not really until the late 90s when like hip hop tracks, are the dominant form of music in America?
Well, define big. Think? I mean, I remember this. I mean, certainly with Raising Hell,
like as a
and
music
License
that
to Ill.
even the mainstream person in Nebraska is aware of.
I'd say with probably more like 86, like License to Ill, Raising Hell. Like those are, some of the LL Cool J stuff. Those are, to me, I mean, once it start hitting MTV in regular rotation, to me, that's when, I mean, that's pretty big. And I would assume somebody in Nebraska or wherever would have, if you had an MTV, if you had cable, you would have heard that. So I probably would say 86.
Okay. I don't know. I think it's probably, for me.
I mean, it got bigger than that,
later.
Certainly.
Yeah.
But I think that's when it started.
When did Yo MTV Rap start?
The late 80s.
But they had rap on before that too. Didn't they have a?
Not really.
Yes.
On MTV. You talking about?
Yeah.
I think the first couple rap tracks on MTV were Run DMC tracks, and then the Beastie Boys kind of were credited with making, MTV kind of put it on because they were like the gateway drug, right?
Yep.
Well, it was, and then when Run DMC broke, by the way, it was the track with Aerosmith that broke them.
Yes.
It wasn't their earlier stuff. So, the Beasties and Aerosmith, and you can put 2 and 2 together as Y on both of those fronts.
Mm-hmm.
But after that, then you start to get the earlier hip hop tracks that end up there, like Fight for Your Right to Party and I'm Bad by LL Cool J and stuff like that. But, and were there videos for like Rapper's Delight and stuff? Yeah, but you weren't really seeing them in heavy rotation on MTV. They might play them as a novelty, but I don't think if you were living in South Dakota but not to pick on South Dakota and Nebraska, but there's no real urban centers, right? And I don't think hip hop was creeping out of there.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm thinking about that question. So it's so tough to what the markers are, but I would say like mid to late 90s is really when it kind of was fully in the mainstream and kind of the forefront of
Right.
music.
I don't think rap was even fully in the mainstream for a larger than 50% of the population until the late 90s. Because even though there were a lot of huge acts in the early 90s and mid 90s, and Matt, you were there too. It was still kind of like a niche, even though it sold, it was still niche, almost like metal or something, where they sold a lot of albums, but people didn't view it as the big, because you still were fighting against pop and rock music were still preeminent. I don't think it was really till the late 90s where it was like, okay, this is clearly the biggest music.
That's why I'm wondering, like, it depends on what your definition of big is, right? Like when it first came out in like the mid 80s, and there's a whole new genre here that the masses are now able to consume on some level, even if it's just like 2 or 3 or 4 artists, that it's like, holy cow. And it was a big thing, versus now this is a dominant genre on the radio or MTV and one of the most popular genres. Clearly, it's not the case in 1986 if you only have 3 artists that are really, making it big. But that's when it started. So it all depends. It's it depends on kind of, what your definition of that is.
Hip hop was bigger at certain, like in New York, it had gotten big. Like, because when I was growing up, hip hop was
right
in my life from about 1988 on, because it just was, because that and LA was where it was centered, really. So
right. Yeah, but you could say even like the whole like East Coast West Coast feud with Tupac and Biggie, that was really for a kind of infamous reason, like that was in the news and stuff. And I feel like,
but
that was
my
kind of
parents know who like Kanye West and Drake are now. I don't know if they were fully aware of Notorious B.I.G. and Tupac in 1994 and 1995. Maybe basically by name, but nowadays, even though they're not putting on these albums, like my parents could identify like Drake and Kanye West and people like that by name, Cardi B, right?
Yep.
In a way that they couldn't.
Who was the first rapper to host SNL?
To host it or to perform on it?
Perform, I guess.
I would probably guess either the Beasties or Run DMC would be my guess. It's got to be a New York act, right?
I would think so.
I don't know if anybody was. Maybe they were plugged into the culture enough to put like Curtis Blow or Sugar Hill Gang or somebody up there, Grandmaster Flash. But I don't know. I'd have to go back and look at the history there.
Yeah, we'll figure that out.
Mm-hmm. So
I think MC Hammer was the first rapper to host SNL.
Okay.
There's an article here saying only 5 rappers have ever hosted SNL, and the first one is Debbie Harry. Come on.
That doesn't count. They count that as a rap. Okay, so Hammer, who?
MC
Kanye.
Hammer, Queen Latifah. No, Kanye never hosted.
Right.
No, he never hosted. Snoop and Ludacris.
And now Megan Thee Stallion.
Ludacris. Yeah, Megan Thee Stallion this past
Right,
week.
Megan Thee Stallion, yes.
Yeah, as opposed to a stallion, right? Or and. Yeah, so, okay. Well, anyway, thumbs in the middle. What do you guys, what's the final take from you?
Yeah,
guys?
thumbs up. I enjoyed it. I wouldn't say it's a And I've recommended. I mean, if you want to know where hip hop, when I say hip hop started, clearly there was stuff before, but this is like at least from what we're doing, this is the first full rap album that we've covered. So, and it's from one of the bands that brought
Grandmaster
it.
Flash album. Well, I guess half.
No,
of it's
it was a hybrid.
Singing.
That was a hybrid.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, this is really, like you guys said, this is really the oldies of rap. So that's how I feel about it.
Exactly.
I enjoy it, but I'm not like head over heels.
Is it like the 50s, like pop songs? Is that what you view it as?
It's like listening to Elvis or something.
Doo-wop or something?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yep.
I think so.
Gotcha. Do you like Rockbox as much as you like Run Around Sue or something?
I probably like Rockbox more than Run Around Sue.
Oh, do you? Okay. I have a soft spot for both. So,
I think I like Run Around Sue better, but it's all good. They're both great.